Released after a life sentence, an elderly woman walks straight from prison to her husband's grave, only to find a second headstone right beside it. Her daughter's name, dates that don't make sense, and behind a nearby tree, a little girl is watching her. This grandmother has just discovered that everyone she loved is gone, but the child hiding in the shadows holds a secret that could prove she never should have been locked up in the first place. 32 years of lies. A daughter who died trying to expose the truth, and a powerful man who will do anything to keep his crimes buried. What really happened the night that sent an innocent woman to prison? Why did her daughter die on a road she had no reason to be on? And what does this frightened little girl know that someone is desperate to keep hidden? The gates opened at 7:14 inches the morning. Doris Marsh had counted 32 years, 4 months, and 11 days inside those walls. She had entered at 31 years old, her hair the color of dark honey, her hands still soft from the lotion she used to rub into them every night before bed. She walked out at 63, her hair silver white, her hands rough and cracked from decades of prison laundry detail. They gave her $47, a bus ticket to the nearest town, and a plastic bag containing the clothes she'd worn the day she arrived. The dress didn't fit anymore. Nothing from that life fit anymore. So she walked out in the same gray sweatpants and faded blue t-shirt she'd been wearing for the past 3 years, the closest thing to civilian clothes the prison commissary offered. The morning air hit her face, and Doris stopped walking. She just stood there, 3 feet past the gate, breathing. The air smelled different out here. Not the recycled staleness of institutional ventilation, not the harsh chemical bite of industrial cleaner. This air smelled like wet grass and car exhaust, and somewhere, impossibly far away, someone was frying bacon. Doris closed her eyes and let the smell wash over her. Bacon. She hadn't smelled bacon in 32 years. A corrections officer called out from behind her. "Ma'am, you need to keep moving. You can't stand there." Doris opened her eyes. The sky was gray, threatening rain, and the wind carried a chill that cut through her thin clothes. She started walking toward the bus stop, her legs stiff and uncertain, like a newborn deer trying to find its footing. The bus station was 1.5 miles from the prison. Doris walked the whole way, even though her knees ached and her left hip had never been the same since she'd fallen in the shower 6 years ago. She walked because she could, because for 32 years, the farthest she'd been allowed to walk was from her cell to the cafeteria, from the cafeteria to the yard, from the yard back to her cell. Now there were no walls, no fences, no guards counting her steps. She could walk to the end of the earth if she wanted to. But Doris didn't want to walk to the end of the earth. She wanted to walk to Ridgewood Cemetery in the town of Clearfield, Ohio. She wanted to find her husband's grave and tell him she was sorry she'd made him wait so long. Howard Marsh had been the kind of man who kept his promises. When he'd married Doris in the summer of 1987, he'd promised to love her until the day he died. When their daughter Christine was born 2 years later, he'd promised to be the father his own father had never been. And when Doris was arrested in 1992, charged with a crime she swore she didn't commit, Howard had promised to wait. "I'll be here," he'd told her through the glass partition during their first visit. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hands pressed flat against the barrier between them. "However long it takes, I'll be here when you get out." Doris had believed him. Even when the appeals failed, even when the years stretched into decades, even when Howard's visits became monthly, then quarterly, then once a year at Christmas. She'd believed him because Howard Marsh was the kind of man who kept his promises. The letters had stopped 12 years ago. At first, Doris had told herself he was sick. Then she'd told herself the mail was being lost. Then she'd told herself he'd moved and hadn't been able to send his new address. She'd written to him at their old house, the Little Blue Cape Cod on Maple Street, where they'd brought Christine home from the hospital, where they'd planted tomatoes in the backyard every spring, where they'd slow danced in the kitchen to songs on the radio while their daughter slept upstairs. The letters came back, returned to sender. No forwarding address. She'd tried calling, but the number was disconnected. She'd asked her court-appointed attorney to look into it, but he'd retired years ago, and his replacement didn't return her messages. She'd written to the Clearfield Public Library, asking if anyone could help her find information about Howard Marsh, but she'd never received a response. So Doris had done the only thing she could do. She'd waited. She'd served her time. She'd kept her head down and her mouth shut, and her hands busy with other people's dirty laundry. And she'd held on to the belief that somewhere out there, Howard was waiting for her too. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the cell block was silent except for the sounds of other women crying or praying or talking to themselves, Doris had allowed herself to consider the alternative. Maybe Howard wasn't waiting anymore. Maybe Howard couldn't wait anymore. Maybe Howard was dead. The bus dropped her in downtown Clearfield at 11:43 inches the morning. The town looked different, smaller, somehow, and older. The hardware store where Howard used to buy his tools had been replaced by a vape shop. The diner where they'd had their first date was now a payday loan office. The movie theater where he'd taken her to see Pretty Woman the year before everything fell apart was boarded up, its marquee blank and rusted. Doris stood on the sidewalk, clutching her plastic bag of useless old clothes, and tried to remember which direction the cemetery was. "You lost, honey?" She turned. An elderly black woman was watching her from the doorway of a small grocery store, arms crossed, expression more curious than concerned. "I'm looking for Ridgewood Cemetery," Doris said. Her voice came out rough and scratchy. She'd barely spoken in years. There hadn't been much point. The woman's eyebrows rose. "That's a long walk from here. 3 miles, maybe more. You got someone coming to pick you up?" Doris shook her head. The woman studied her for a long moment. Doris knew what she saw: the institutional clothes, the plastic bag, the particular kind of pallor that came from decades without real sunlight. There was no hiding where she'd come from, but the woman didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't suddenly remember somewhere else she needed to be. "Wait here," she said, and disappeared into the store. She came back a few minutes later with a brown paper bag and a bottle of water. "There's a sandwich in there, turkey and cheese, and an apple. You eat something before you start walking. Hear me?" Doris stared at the bag. "I don't have money to." "Did I ask for money?" The woman pressed the bag into Doris's hands. "Cemetery's that way. Follow Main Street until it turns into Route 9, then take the first right after the gas station. You'll see the gates." "Thank you," Doris managed. "Thank you. You don't need to thank me." The woman's voice softened. "We all need a little kindness sometimes, even when we don't think we deserve it." She went back into her store, and Doris was alone again on the sidewalk, holding a paper bag that felt heavier than it should have, like it contained more than just a sandwich and an apple, like it contained proof that the world hadn't completely forgotten how to be gentle. Doris started walking. The rain began when she was halfway there. It started as a drizzle, light enough to ignore, but within minutes it had turned into a steady downpour that soaked through her thin clothes and plastered her silver hair to her skull. Doris kept walking. She'd survived worse than rain. She'd survived strip searches and solitary confinement, and the day her mother died, and she wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. She'd survived the morning they'd told her that her appeals were exhausted, that she would die in prison, that there was no more hope left. Rain was nothing. Rain was just water. The cemetery gates appeared through the gray curtain of weather, black iron twisted into shapes that might have been elegant once, but now just looked tired. Doris pushed through them and stepped onto the gravel path that wound between the headstones. She didn't know where Howard was buried. She'd imagined this moment so many times, walking through the cemetery, finding his grave, kneeling in the grass and telling him everything she'd never been able to say through prison glass and monitored phone calls. But she'd never imagined doing it blind, wandering between strangers' graves in the pouring rain, searching for a name she'd carried in her heart for 32 years. The cemetery was larger than she remembered. Rows and rows of headstones stretched out in every direction, some tall and ornate, others simple and small. Doris walked slowly, reading names as she went. Patterson, Wheeler, Dominguez, Morrison, no Marsh. She walked for what felt like hours. The rain didn't let up. Her shoes squelched with every step, and her fingers had gone numb with cold. But she kept going, kept searching, kept believing that if she just looked hard enough, she would find him. And then she did. The headstone was modest, gray granite, about 2 feet tall, with a simple curved top. The letters were carved deep into the stone, filled with something dark that made them stand out even in the rain. Howard James Marsh, beloved husband and father, the 3rd of March 1958, October 17, 2019. He kept his promises. Doris's knees gave out. She hit the wet ground hard, but she didn't feel it. She didn't feel anything except the words carved into that stone, burning themselves into her brain. The 17th of October 2019, 5 years ago. Howard had died 5 years ago, and no one had told her. No one had thought she deserved to know. She'd spent 5 years writing letters to a dead man, believing he was alive, believing he was waiting, believing that when she finally got out, he would be there. But Howard was here, in the ground, under a stone that said he kept his promises. "I'm sorry," Doris whispered, pressing her palms into the wet earth in front of the grave. "I'm sorry I made you wait so long. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry, Howard. I'm so sorry." The rain fell. The wind blew. Doris knelt in the mud and cried for the first time in 32 years. She didn't know how long she stayed there. Long enough for the rain to soak through to her skin, long enough for her tears to run dry, and her voice to go hoarse from apologizing to a man who couldn't hear her anymore. When she finally lifted her head, her vision blurred with rain and exhaustion. She saw it, another headstone, right next to Howard's. Same gray granite, same simple design, same dark lettering, but a different name. Doris blinked hard, trying to clear her eyes, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, because it couldn't be real. It couldn't be what it looked like. There had to be some mistake, some cruel trick of the light and the rain and her own grief-addled mind. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, the mud cold and thick beneath her palms. She got close enough to read the words, close enough to be sure. Christine Mary Marsh, beloved daughter and mother, the 12th of September 1989, June 3, 2021, forever in our hearts. Christine, her daughter Christine, the baby she'd held in her arms for 3 years before the world ripped her away. The little girl she'd left behind, believing, trusting that Howard would raise her, protect her, keep her safe until Doris could come home. The child she'd written to every single week for 32 years, even when the letters stopped being answered, even when the hope died. Christine was dead. Christine was dead, and she'd been dead for 3 years. And Doris hadn't known, hadn't been told, hadn't been given the chance to say goodbye, to hold her hand, to tell her that she loved her, that she'd always loved her, that every day in that prison she'd thought about her daughter's face, and there was something else, something in that inscription that didn't make sense, something that cut through the grief like a shard of glass. Beloved daughter and mother, mother. Christine had been a mother. Doris stared at the words until they blurred. Christine had a child. Doris had a grandchild. Somewhere out there, a piece of Christine was still alive. But where? With whom? And why hadn't anyone told her? She was still kneeling there, frozen between Howard's grave and Christine's, when she heard it. A twig snapping. Doris's head jerked up. The rain was lighter now, fading to a mist, and through the gray curtain, she could see the shapes of trees at the edge of the cemetery. Old oaks with thick trunks and heavy branches, their leaves just starting to turn with the early fall. Behind one of those trees, partially hidden by the massive trunk, something moved. Someone moved. A small figure, child-sized, pressing against the bark, trying to stay hidden, but peeking out just far enough that Doris could see her face. A little girl, 8, maybe 9 years old, brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, thin arms wrapped around herself against the cold, and eyes, wide, frightened eyes, fixed on Doris with an expression that was equal parts terror and desperate hope. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The old woman kneeling in the mud, soaked to the bone, surrounded by the graves of everyone she'd ever loved. The little girl hiding behind a tree, watching her like a deer watching a hunter, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Then Doris saw it, the girl's face, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her chin, the way she held her head, slightly tilted to the left. It was like looking at a photograph, like looking at a ghost, like looking through a window into the past, to a time before prison and loss and 32 years of silence. The girl looked exactly like Christine had at that age. "Oh my God," Doris breathed. The girl flinched at the sound of her voice, retreating further behind the tree. Only half her face was visible now, one eye peeking out, watching. Doris didn't move, didn't stand up, didn't try to approach. She just stayed where she was, on her knees in the mud, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It's okay," she said, keeping her voice as soft as she could manage. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to do anything. She swallowed hard. "I just need to know. Are you Christine's daughter?" The eye blinked. The girl didn't answer. "Please," Doris whispered. "Please. I'm her mother. I'm Christine's mother. I've been away for a long time, a very long time, and I just found out that she's gone." Her voice broke on the last word. "I didn't even know she had a daughter. I didn't know about you. Please, just tell me, are you my granddaughter?" The girl was silent for so long that Doris thought she might simply turn and run, disappear into the cemetery like a ghost, leaving Doris alone with nothing but gravestones and questions. But then the girl moved, slowly, carefully. She stepped out from behind the tree. She stood there in the mist, her thin frame shivering, her arms still wrapped around herself, and she nodded, just once, just a small dip of her head. But it was enough. Doris felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been sealed shut for 32 years, locked away where it couldn't hurt her. But now it was open, and all the pain and love and grief and hope came flooding out at once, overwhelming her, drowning her. "What's your name?" she managed to ask. The girl's voice was barely audible, almost lost in the wind. "Lily, Lily." Christine had named her daughter Lily. "Lily," Doris repeated, tasting the name, holding it in her mouth like something precious. "That's beautiful. That's a beautiful name." The girl, Lily, didn't move any closer, but she didn't run away either. She just stood there, watching Doris with those eyes that were so much like Christine's, so much like the daughter Doris had lost twice now. "How did you know I'd be here?" Doris asked. Lily's jaw tightened. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than before, harder. "I've been waiting for you," she said. "I've been coming here every day for a week, waiting, because I knew they'd have to let you out eventually, and I knew you'd come here first." Her eyes glistened. "You're the only one left who might tell me the truth." "The truth about what?" Lily looked at the gravestones. At Howard? At Christine? At the wet earth that covered them both. "About what really happened," she said. "About why my mom is dead, and why does everyone keep lying to me about it?" The rain has stopped completely now. The mist was clearing, and pale sunlight was starting to break through the clouds. Doris knelt in the mud, staring at this child, her grandchild, and felt the ground shift beneath her. She had come here to say goodbye. Instead, she was just beginning to understand how much she'd lost, and how many lies she was going to have to unravel to find the truth. Lily didn't move from her spot near the oak tree. She stood with her arms wrapped tight around her thin frame, watching Doris with an expression that shifted between hope and suspicion, like she couldn't decide which feeling to trust. The mist had lifted, but the air was still cold and damp, and both of them were shivering now. The old woman on her knees in the mud, the child standing 10 feet away, a lifetime of secrets stretched between them. "You're cold," Doris said. It wasn't a question. She could see the girl trembling, could see the goosebumps on her bare arms. Lily was wearing a thin purple hoodie that was at least 2 sizes too big, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the hem reaching almost to her knees. "Hand-me-downs." Doris recognized the look. She'd worn enough hand-me-downs in her own childhood to know. "I'm fine," Lily said, but her teeth chattered on the last word, betraying her. Doris pushed herself up from the ground. Her knees screamed in protest, and her left hip sent a sharp bolt of pain down her leg, but she managed to stand. She was covered in mud from the waist down, her gray sweatpants now brown and soaked through, her shoes making a squelching sound with every movement. "We should get out of this weather," Doris said. "Is there somewhere we can go? Somewhere we can talk?" Lily's eyes narrowed. "How do I know you're really her? Really my grandmother?" It was a fair question, a smart question, This child had clearly learned not to trust easily, and Doris felt a surge of something between pride and heartbreak. Christine's daughter, careful, cautious, already wounded by a world that had given her reasons to be afraid. You don't, Doris admitted. You don't know that I'm telling the truth, but I can prove it if you give me a chance. She paused, trying to think of something, anything, that would bridge the gap between them. Your mother had a birthmark on her left shoulder blade, shaped like a crescent moon. I used to tell her it meant she was born under a magic spell, that she was destined for great things. Lily's expression flickered. Something shifted behind her eyes. She told me that story, the girl whispered. She said her mom made it up, said it was silly, but she loved it anyway. It was silly, Doris agreed, and her voice cracked. I was 23 years old when she was born. I didn't know anything about being a mother. I just made things up as I went along, tried to give her something beautiful to hold on to. She swallowed hard. I never stopped thinking about her. Not for one single day. I wrote to her every week for 32 years. Even when she stopped writing back, she never got those letters. Doris blinked. What? She never got them. Lily's voice was flat, matter of fact, but there was anger underneath it. A cold, controlled fury that seemed too heavy for such a small body. She thought you forgot about her. She thought you stopped caring. That's what they told her. Who told her that? Who told her I stopped caring? But Lily shook her head. Not here. Not in front of them. She glanced at the gravestones, at Howard and Christine lying side by side in the wet earth. They deserve better than to hear this. She turned and started walking toward the cemetery gates. After a few steps, she looked back over her shoulder. Are you coming or not? Lily led her through the streets of Clearfield, taking back roads and alleyways that Doris didn't recognize. The town had changed so much in 32 years. Buildings she remembered were gone, replaced by parking lots or chain stores. The old library, where she'd taken Christine for story time, had been converted into a fitness center. The park where Howard had proposed to her was now a construction site, orange fencing surrounding piles of dirt and idle machinery. But Lily navigated it all with the confidence of someone who knew every shortcut, every hidden path. She moved quickly, her oversized sneakers slapping against the wet pavement, and Doris struggled to keep up. Her hip was on fire now, every step sending a fresh wave of pain through her body. But she didn't complain. She didn't ask Lily to slow down. She just gritted her teeth and followed, because this child was the only connection she had left to everything she'd lost. After 15 minutes, Lily stopped in front of a small brick building wedged between a laundromat and a check-cashing place. A faded sign above the door read, Clearfield Community Center, in letters that had once been blue but had weathered to a pale gray. It's closed on Saturdays, Lily said, but I know how to get in. She disappeared around the side of the building, and Doris followed. There was a window near the back, low to the ground, and Lily pushed it open with practiced ease. She climbed through, then turned and offered her hand to help Doris. It took some maneuvering. Doris wasn't as flexible as she'd once been, and the window frame bit into her hips and shoulders as she squeezed through. But Lily was patient, guiding her, and eventually Doris tumbled into a small storage room filled with folding chairs and boxes of old decorations. This way, Lily said, leading her through a door and into a larger room. It was some kind of rec hall, a scuffed wooden floor, a small stage at one end, folding tables stacked against the walls. The lights were off, but gray daylight filtered through high windows, giving everything a muted, dreamlike quality. Lily pulled 2 chairs off a stack and set them facing each other. Then she sat down, crossed her arms, and fixed Doris with a stare that was far too old for her face. Okay, she said. Now we can talk. Doris lowered herself into the chair across from her granddaughter. Her wet clothes clung to her skin, and she was shivering badly now, but she barely noticed. All she could see was Lily's face, Christine's face, the ghost of her daughter staring back at her through a child's eyes. How old are you? Doris asked. 9. I'll be 10 in March. 9 years old, which meant Christine had been, Doris did the math quickly, 24 when Lily was born, 24 years old, and Doris had been in prison, had missed everything. The pregnancy, the birth, the first steps, the first words, The first day of school, all of it stolen from her. Who's been taking care of you? Doris asked. Since your mother. Since Christine. My aunt. Lily's voice went flat. Aunt Rachel. Rachel. The name hit Doris like a punch to the stomach. Rachel Marsh was Howard's younger sister. She'd never liked Doris, had made that clear from the day they met. Rachel had thought Howard could do better, had told him so repeatedly, had looked at Doris with barely concealed contempt at their wedding. And when Doris had been arrested, Rachel had been the first one to declare her guilty, the first one to demand that Howard cut all ties, the first one to say that Christine would be better off pretending her mother had never existed. Rachel, Doris repeated slowly. Rachel has custody of you? Lily nodded. She's had me since my mom died, but she didn't want me. She made that real clear. The girl's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched into fists in her lap. She only took me because of the money. What money? Grandpa Howard left money for me, in his will, a trust fund, for when I turn 18. But Aunt Rachel's the trustee, which means she controls it until then. Lily's jaw tightened. She gets paid to take care of me. A lot. But she doesn't actually take care of me. She just keeps me. Doris felt sick. The picture forming in her mind was ugly, familiar. She'd seen it before. Children treated as paychecks, kept alive but not loved, housed but not homed. Does she hurt you? Doris asked carefully. Lily shook her head. Not like that. She doesn't hit me or anything. She just pretends I don't exist, unless someone's watching. Then she puts on this whole act, like she's Mother of the Year. The girl's lip curled. She's good at acting. Where does she think you are right now? School field trip. We're supposed to be at a museum until 4. Lily glanced at a clock on the wall. It was just past 1. I've got time. Doris leaned forward. Lily, you said you've been waiting for me. You said everyone's been lying to you. What did you mean? What happened to your mother? For the first time, Lily's composure cracked. Her eyes filled with tears, and she blinked hard, trying to force them back. They said it was an accident, she whispered. A car accident. Said she was driving too fast, lost control, hit a tree. She shook her head fiercely. But that's not true. I know it's not true. My mom was the most careful driver in the world. She never went over the speed limit. She always wore her seatbelt. She always checked her mirrors like 100 times before she changed lanes. Maybe something happened, Doris said gently. Maybe an animal ran into the road, or another car. No, Lily's voice was sharp. You don't understand. The accident happened at 3 in the morning, on a road 20 miles from our house. A road she had no reason to be on. And the police, they didn't investigate. They just called it an accident, closed the case, and that was it. How do you know they didn't investigate? Because I asked. I went to the police station twice and asked to see the report. They said it wasn't available, said it was confidential. Lily's hands were shaking now. A traffic accident report is confidential? That's not normal. That's not how it works. I looked it up. Doris stared at her granddaughter, 9 years old, and she'd gone to the police station alone, twice, had researched public records law, had refused to accept the story she'd been told, Christine's daughter, through and through. There's more, Lily continued. About a month before she died, my mom started acting weird, scared. She kept checking the locks on the doors, looking out the windows like she was expecting someone, and she made me memorize a phone number. Said if anything ever happened to her, I should call that number and ask for help. Did you call it? Lily nodded. After she died. But it was disconnected. Number not in service. She pulled something from the pocket of her oversized hoodie, a folded piece of paper, worn soft from handling. I kept it anyway. Thought maybe someday I could figure out whose number it was. She handed the paper to Doris. The number was written in Christine's handwriting. Doris recognized it immediately. The same loops and curves she'd seen on birthday cards and school projects 30 years ago. Her daughter's handwriting, preserved on this scrap of paper like a message from beyond the grave. But it was the number itself that made Doris's blood run cold. She knew that number. She'd called it 1,000 times, back before her arrest. It was her parents' phone number, the landline at the house where she'd grown up, where her mother and father had lived until they died, her mother in 2003, her father in 2007. The house had been sold after her father's death, the phone line disconnected. Why would Christine have given Lily that number? The number to a house that had been sold and a phone that hadn't worked in over 15 years? Unless Christine had thought Doris's parents were still alive. Unless someone had been lying to Christine too. Lily, Doris said slowly, what did your mother tell you about me? About your grandmother? Lily's face went careful, guarded. She said you were in prison for killing someone. The words hit Doris like stones, but she didn't flinch. She'd had 32 years to come to terms with what she'd been accused of, what she'd been convicted of, what almost everyone in the world believed about her. Did she say who? A woman. Someone named Patricia Vance. Lily watched Doris's face carefully, looking for a reaction. She said you were guilty, that you confessed. I did confess, Doris admitted. After 3 days of interrogation with no lawyer present, after they told me my daughter would be taken away and put in foster care if I didn't cooperate, after they promised me that if I just signed the paper, I could go home and everything would be okay. She shook her head. I was young, I was scared, and I made a mistake that cost me 32 years of my life. But did you do it? Did you actually kill her? No, Doris's voice was firm, absolute. I didn't kill Patricia Vance. I barely knew Patricia Vance. She was a co-worker. We worked at the same insurance company, but we weren't friends, weren't enemies, weren't anything to each other. I had no reason to hurt her, no motive. The only evidence against me was my coerced confession and a witness who claimed to see me near her apartment that night. If you were innocent, why didn't you fight it? Why didn't you prove it? I tried. For years, I tried. I filed appeals, wrote letters, begged lawyers to take my case. But coerced confessions are hard to overturn, especially when you don't have money for good attorneys. And the witness. Doris stopped, took a breath. The witness was credible, respected in the community. No reason to lie, everyone said. Why would he lie? Who was the witness? Doris was quiet for a long moment. She'd spent decades trying not to think about him, trying not to let the rage consume her from the inside out. His name was Richard Vance, she said finally. Patricia's husband. Lily's eyes went wide. The victim's husband was the witness against you? He said he saw me running from their apartment building the night she was killed. Said he'd recognize my face anywhere. Said I'd threatened Patricia at work, that I was obsessed with her, that I was dangerous. Doris's voice was bitter. None of it was true. But he was a grieving widower, and I was a scared young mother who'd already confessed. Who was the jury going to believe? But if he lied, if the husband lied, doesn't that mean? It means he had a reason to lie. It means someone else killed Patricia Vance, and Richard Vance knew about it, maybe committed it himself. Doris leaned forward. I've had 32 years to think about this, Lily. 32 years to go over every detail, every inconsistency, every moment of that trial, and the only conclusion I've ever been able to reach is that I was framed, deliberately, by someone who needed a scapegoat. Lily was silent for a moment, processing. Then she said, my mom knew. What? She knew you were innocent. Or at least, she thought you might be. Lily's words came faster now, tumbling over each other. A few weeks before she died, she told me she'd found something. Evidence, she called it. Something that proved you didn't do it. She said she was going to make it right. She said she was going to get you out. Doris's heart stopped. She found evidence? What evidence? Where? I don't know. She wouldn't tell me. Said it was too dangerous, that I was too young, that she'd explain everything when it was over. Lily's voice cracked. But then she died, and whatever she found, it died with her. Or somebody took it. The community center was silent, except for the sound of their breathing. Doris sat very still, her mind racing. Pieces of a puzzle she'd been trying to solve for 3 decades, suddenly shifting into new configurations. Christine had found evidence. Evidence that could have freed Doris. And then Christine had died, in a suspicious accident, on a road she had no reason to be on, at 3 in the morning. That wasn't a coincidence. That couldn't be a coincidence. Someone had killed her daughter to keep her in prison. Someone had murdered Christine to protect a 30-year-old lie. Lily, Doris said, and her voice was very calm, very steady. Because if she let herself feel what she was actually feeling, she would start screaming and never stop. Do you know if your mother kept any files, any papers, anywhere she might have hidden what she found? Aunt Rachel cleaned out the house after she died, threw almost everything away. But Lily hesitated. There's a storage unit. My mom rented it a few months before she died. Aunt Rachel doesn't know about it. I only know because I found the key in my mom's jewelry box. And a receipt. Where's the key now? Lily reached into her pocket again. This time she pulled out a small brass key, tarnished with age, attached to a faded paper tag. Unit 47, she said. Clearfield Self-Storage. I've never been there. I was too scared to go alone. She looked up at Doris, and for the first time, she looked like what she was, a frightened child who'd been carrying a burden too heavy for her small shoulders. Will you come with me? Doris took the key from her granddaughter's hand. It was warm from Lily's pocket, warm from being held and touched and worried over for years. Yes, she said, I'll come with you. She looked down at the key, at the number stamped into the paper tag, at this tiny piece of metal that might hold the answers to everything. Christine had died trying to save her. Doris would be damned if she let that sacrifice be for nothing. The Clearfield self-storage facility sat on the outskirts of town, a collection of squat orange buildings surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The kind of place people used to store the things they couldn't bear to throw away but couldn't stand to look at anymore. Old furniture, holiday decorations, the physical remnants of lives that had moved on or ended. Doris and Lily stood across the street, studying the entrance. There was a small office near the gate, and through the window, Doris could see a heavy-set man sitting behind a counter, watching something on his phone. We need to sign in, Lily said. There's a logbook. Everyone who comes has to write their name and unit number. How do you know that? I came here once. Got as far as the gate before I chickened out. Lily's voice was tight with shame. I was afraid of what I'd find. Afraid that whatever my mom was hiding, it would be too big for me to handle alone. Doris looked down at her granddaughter, 9 years old, carrying the weight of her mother's secrets, her grandmother's imprisonment, a family full of lies. No child should have to bear that kind of burden. You're not alone anymore, Doris said. They crossed the street together. The man in the office barely looked up when they entered. He slid a clipboard across the counter without taking his eyes off his phone. Name and unit number, he said flatly. Doris hesitated. She didn't want to leave a record of being here, didn't know who might be watching, who might be looking for Christine's secrets. But there was no other way in. She picked up the pen and wrote, Margaret Wilson, Unit 47. It was the name of her cellmate from her first year in prison. A woman who died of cancer in 1998. A woman who couldn't be traced back to Doris Marsh. The man glanced at the clipboard, grunted, and pressed a button. The gate buzzed open. Close it behind you, he said, still not looking up. They walked through. The storage units were arranged in long rows, orange doors with white numbers painted on them. Unit 47 was near the back, tucked into a corner where the security cameras didn't quite reach. Christine had chosen well. Doris handed the key to Lily. You should be the one to open it. Lily took the key with trembling fingers. She inserted it into the padlock, turned it, and the lock clicked open. Then she grabbed the handle at the bottom of the roll-up door and pulled. The door rattled upward, revealing darkness. Doris found a light switch on the inside wall and flipped it. A single bare bulb flickered to life overhead, casting harsh shadows across the contents of the unit. It wasn't much. A few cardboard boxes stacked against the back wall, a filing cabinet, old and dented, a small wooden desk with a chair tucked underneath, and on the desk, a laptop computer, closed, its surface covered in a thin layer of dust. Christine had set up a workspace here, a secret office where she could investigate without anyone knowing. She was serious, Doris breathed. She was really doing this. Lily walked slowly into the unit, her eyes moving over everything. She touched the back of the chair, leaving fingerprints in the dust. This is where she was going, she said softly. All those nights when she said she was working late, she was coming here. Doris moved to the filing cabinet and pulled open the top drawer. It was stuffed with manila folders, each one labeled in Christine's handwriting. Doris read the tabs, her heart pounding harder with each one. Patricia Vance, autopsy report, Richard Vance, background trial transcripts, State v. Marsh witness statements, insurance company records, timeline, night of murder. Christine hadn't just found evidence. She'd built an entire case. A comprehensive investigation into everything that had happened 32 years ago. Doris pulled out the folder labeled Richard Vance, background, and opened it. Inside were pages and pages of documents. Bank records, property deeds, marriage certificates, employment history, and photographs. Grainy printouts of a man in his 50s, gray-haired and distinguished, wearing expensive suits, and standing in front of expensive houses. Richard Vance hadn't stayed a grieving widower for long. According to Christine's notes, he'd remarried less than 2 years after Patricia's death. His new wife was the daughter of a state senator. The marriage had elevated Richard from a mid-level insurance executive to a man with political connections and social standing. He'd gone on to become the CEO of the insurance company where he, Patricia, and Doris had all once worked. He'd served on the boards of charities and community organizations. He'd been named Businessman of the Year by the Clearfield Chamber of Commerce in 2015. Richard Vance had built an empire on his dead wife's grave and on Doris's stolen life. "Look at this," Lily said. She was sitting at the desk, the laptop open in front of her. The screen glowed with a password prompt. "It needs a code," Lily said. "I don't know what it is." Doris came to stand beside her. She stared at the blinking cursor, thinking, Christine would have chosen something meaningful, something she could remember but that others wouldn't guess. "Try your birthday," Doris said. Lily typed 031015, incorrect password. "My mom's birthday? 091289, incorrect password." Doris thought harder. What would Christine have used? What was important enough to her that she'd remember it under pressure, but obscure enough that no one else would think of it? Then it hit her. "Try the day I was arrested," Doris said quietly. "April 3rd, 1992. Lily typed 040392. The screen flickered. The password prompt disappeared, and Christine's desktop appeared, covered in folders and documents. Doris let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Even after everything, Christine had been thinking of her, had used the worst day of their lives as a key to unlock the truth. They spent the next hour going through Christine's files. The laptop contained everything Christine had discovered, organized meticulously, cross-referenced and annotated. She'd been thorough, methodical. The daughter Doris had raised, all grown up, applying the same careful attention to detail that Doris had taught her when they'd done puzzles together at the kitchen table 35 years ago. The picture that emerged was damning. Patricia Vance hadn't been murdered by a random coworker. She'd been murdered by her husband. Christine had found records showing that Richard and Patricia's marriage had been falling apart in the months before her death. Patricia had filed for divorce, a filing that had been buried and never made it to court. She'd also changed the beneficiary on her life insurance policy, removing Richard entirely. But that change had been reversed after her death, in paperwork that bore a forged signature. Richard Vance had collected nearly $500,000 in life insurance money after Patricia died. Money that had funded his rise to power, his new marriage, his transformation from nobody to somebody. But that wasn't the worst of it. Christine had tracked down the original detective on the case, a man named Frank Holloway, who'd retired in 2005. He'd agreed to meet with her, and she'd recorded their conversation. Doris found the audio file and pressed play. Frank Holloway's voice filled the storage unit, gravelly with age and heavy with regret. "I knew something was wrong from the start. The evidence didn't add up. The confession was coerced. I could see it in that poor woman's eyes. But I had pressure coming from above. The DA wanted a quick conviction. The victim's husband had connections, knew people, and I was told, in no uncertain terms, to close the case and move on." Christine's voice, younger and stronger than Doris, had heard it in decades. "Are you saying there was a cover-up?" "I'm saying I was a coward. I knew that woman, Doris Marsh, was innocent. I knew Richard Vance was lying through his teeth. But I had a family, a pension, 20 years on the force, and I told myself it wasn't my problem, that someone else would fix it." A long pause. "No one ever did. Do you have any proof? Anything I can use?" "I kept copies of everything, the original case files, before they were altered. The real forensic report, the one that showed the timeline, didn't match. I've had them in a safe deposit box for 30 years, waiting for someone to care enough to ask. The recording ended. Doris stared at the laptop screen. 30 years. The proof of her innocence had existed for 30 years, sitting in a safe deposit box while she rotted in prison. Because a detective had been too afraid to speak up, because the system had decided her life was less important than convenience. There's more, Lily said. She'd been reading through the physical folders while Doris listened to the recording. Her face was pale. Grandma, you need to see this. She handed Doris a folder labeled Connection to Mom's Death. Inside were copies of phone records, text messages, and a photograph, a blurry image taken from a distance, showing two men talking in a parking lot. One of them was Richard Vance, older now but still recognizable. The other was wearing a police uniform. Christine's handwritten note was paper-clipped to the photo. RV, meeting with Officer Daniel Kerr, Clearfield PD. Kerr was the responding officer to my mother's original arrest in 1992. He's also the officer who investigated and closed my accident when I die. This is not a coincidence. When I die. Not if, when. Christine had known. She'd known that what she was doing was dangerous, that the people she was investigating would try to stop her, and she'd kept going anyway. She knew they were going to kill her, Doris whispered. She knew, and she didn't stop, because she wanted to save you. Lily's voice was barely audible. She said that, once, that she was going to bring you home, no matter what it cost. Doris closed her eyes. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her daughter had died for her, had sacrificed everything, her safety, her future, her life, to prove her mother's innocence. And Doris hadn't even known, hadn't been able to thank her, hadn't been able to say goodbye. What do we do now? Lily asked. We have all this evidence. Proof that you're innocent. Proof that Richard Vance killed his wife and framed you. Proof that he probably had my mom killed too. But who do we take it to? If the police are involved, not the local police, Doris said, opening her eyes. They're compromised, have been from the start. Then who? Doris thought about it. 32 years in prison had taught her a lot about the justice system, its flaws, its failures, but also its pressure points. The FBI, she said finally. Public corruption is federal jurisdiction. If we can prove that local law enforcement conspired with Richard Vance to cover up a murder and frame an innocent woman, that's exactly the kind of case they'd take. Do you know anyone at the FBI? No, but I know someone who might. Doris thought of the woman at the grocery store, the one who'd given her a sandwich and directions to the cemetery. Small towns had long memories, and small-town kindness often came with connections. But first, they needed to secure the evidence. All of it. Help me pack everything, Doris said. Every folder, every document, the laptop. We take it all with us. We don't leave anything behind for someone to find and destroy. They worked quickly, loading boxes and files into garbage bags that Doris found in a corner of the unit. When they were done, the storage space was empty except for the furniture. Doris looked around one last time. This was where Christine had spent her final months, working in secret to right a 30-year-old wrong. This was where her daughter had become a hero. Thank you, Doris said softly, to the empty room, to Christine, to the universe that had somehow brought her here. I won't let it be for nothing. They carried the bags out of the storage facility, past the board attendant, who didn't even look up from his phone. The afternoon sun was starting to fade, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Lily checked her watch. I have to get back soon, she said. The field trip bus returns at 4. If I'm not there when Aunt Rachel picks me up, she'll ask questions you can't answer. Doris nodded. Go. I'll find somewhere safe to keep all of this. But where will you go? Where will you sleep tonight? It was a question Doris hadn't let herself think about. She had $47. No identification, no phone, no connections. She was a 63-year-old woman with nothing but the clothes on her back and garbage bags full of evidence. I'll figure it out, she said. I've survived worse. Lily hesitated. Then she threw her arms around Doris, hugging her fiercely, her small body pressed tight against her grandmother's. I'm glad you're here, Lily whispered. I'm glad I finally found you. Doris held her granddaughter, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her small hands. This child, This brave, brilliant, lonely child who'd been waiting for years for someone to believe her, to help her, to tell her she wasn't crazy. "I'm glad too," Doris said. "And I promise you, Lily, I promise you on your mother's grave, we're going to get justice. For Christine, for your grandfather, for all the years they stole from us. We're going to make them pay." Lily pulled back and looked up at her grandmother. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set with determination. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll sneak out again. Meet me at the cemetery, by Mom's grave, 8 o'clock. I'll be there." Lily nodded once, then turned and ran. Doris watched her go until she disappeared around a corner, swallowed up by the streets of Clearfield, returning to a life of surveillance and suspicion, and an aunt who kept her like a pet instead of loving her like family. Then Doris picked up her garbage bags full of evidence and started walking. She ended up at the Clearfield Community Church, a small white building with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. The sign out front said, "All are welcome," and listed service times for Sunday. The door was unlocked. Inside, the church was quiet and cool, lit by afternoon light filtering through stained glass windows. Wooden pews lined the center aisle, and at the front, a simple altar held a brass cross and 2 candles. Doris hadn't been inside a church in 32 years. Religion hadn't survived her imprisonment. She'd prayed in the beginning, begged God to intervene, to prove her innocence, to bring her home to her family. But the prayers had gone unanswered, and eventually she'd stopped asking. Now, standing in this small-town sanctuary, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not faith, exactly, but something close. A sense that maybe, after all these years, the universe was finally paying attention. She found a small office in the back, unlocked and empty. There was a couch against one wall, old and sagging but clean. She stashed the garbage bags behind it, covering them with her body as she lay down. Tomorrow, she would find help. Tomorrow, she would start the process of bringing down Richard Vance and everyone who'd helped him. Tomorrow, she would begin to fight for justice. But tonight, she would rest. For the first time in 32 years, Doris Marsh would sleep as a free woman, in a church that promised all were welcome, with her daughter's secrets safe beside her. She closed her eyes. She dreamed of Christine. Doris woke to the sound of footsteps. She sat up fast, her heart hammering, 32 years of prison instinct screaming at her to be alert, to be ready. The church office was dim, early morning light barely filtering through the small window near the ceiling. The garbage bags of evidence were still behind the couch where she'd hidden them. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. "Hello?" A woman's voice, cautious but not threatening. "Is someone in there?" Doris considered her options. She could hide, stay silent, hope whoever it was would go away. But she was too old for hiding, too tired for running. And she needed help, real help, if she was going to do what needed to be done. "Yes," she called out. "I'm here. I'm not going to cause any trouble." The door opened slowly. A black woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, wearing a purple cardigan and holding a set of keys. She had kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she looked at Doris with more curiosity than alarm. "Well," the woman said, "you're not the usual kind of visitor we get sleeping in the church office." "I'm sorry. The door was unlocked, and I didn't have anywhere else to go." "No need to apologize. That's what the unlocked door is for." The woman stepped into the office and extended her hand. "I'm Pastor Gloria Williams. This is my church." Doris shook her hand. Doris Marsh. Something flickered in Pastor Gloria's eyes. Recognition. But she didn't pull away, didn't recoil. "Doris Marsh," she repeated slowly. "I remember that name. You were convicted of killing Patricia Vance back in '92. It was all anyone talked about for months." She paused. "You're out now?" "Released yesterday. Served my full sentence. 32 years. Pastor Gloria shook her head. "That's a long time to be away from the world." She glanced at the garbage bags behind the couch. "And those?" Doris hesitated. She'd learned in prison not to trust anyone, not to share information that could be used against her. But something about Pastor Gloria's steady gaze, her lack of judgment, made Doris want to take a chance. "Evidence," Doris said. "Evidence that I was framed, that the real killer has been walking free this whole time, building a life on my stolen years. Pastor Gloria was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled up a chair and sat down across from Doris. "Tell me everything," she said. Doris talked for over an hour. She told Pastor Gloria about finding the graves, about Lily hiding behind the tree, about the storage unit and Christine's investigation and the recording of Detective Holloway confessing to the cover-up. She told her about Richard Vance, about Officer Kerr, about the web of corruption that had kept her imprisoned for 3 decades while the guilty walked free. Pastor Gloria listened without interrupting. When Doris finished, the pastor sat back in her chair and let out a long breath. "Richard Vance," she said. "I know that man. He's donated to half the charities in town. Sits on the board of the hospital. Everyone thinks he's a pillar of the community. He's a murderer," Doris said flatly. "He killed his wife, framed me for it. And when my daughter got too close to the truth, he had her killed too. You have proof of all this?" "I have enough to raise questions. Enough to force a real investigation." Doris leaned forward. "But I can't go to the local police. They're compromised. I need to get this to someone who can actually do something with it. The FBI? Maybe. Federal prosecutors." Pastor Gloria nodded slowly. "My nephew works for the Department of Justice in Columbus. Criminal Division. He's a good man, honest, principled. If anyone would know how to handle something like this, it's him." Hope sparked in Doris's chest, small but fierce. "Would he talk to me? Would he look at what I have?" "I think he would, especially if I vouch for you." Pastor Gloria stood up. "Let me make some calls. In the meantime, you need a shower, clean clothes, and a real breakfast. The church has a small apartment in the basement for visiting missionaries. It's yours for as long as you need it." Doris felt tears prick at her eyes. She'd been prepared for suspicion, hostility, doors slammed in her face. She hadn't been prepared for kindness. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. You don't know if I'm telling the truth." Pastor Gloria smiled. "I've been doing this work for 40 years, Doris. I've learned to read people, and I've learned that the ones society throws away are often the ones most worth saving." She put a hand on Doris's shoulder. "Besides, I remember your trial. I remember thinking something didn't add up. A young mother with no history of violence, confessing to a brutal murder after 3 days of interrogation. It never sat right with me. You believed I was innocent? Even back then, I believed there were questions that deserved answers. Now, 32 years later, maybe we finally get to ask them." Doris met Lily at the cemetery at 8 o'clock, as promised. The morning was cool and clear, the sky a pale blue washed clean by yesterday's rain. Lily was already there when Doris arrived, sitting cross-legged in front of Christine's grave, talking softly to the headstone. "I brought her, Mom," Lily was saying. "Just like I promised. She's really here. She's going to help us." Doris's heart clenched. This child, talking to her dead mother's grave, promising that help had finally arrived. How many times had Lily sat here alone, begging for someone to believe her? Lily. The girl looked up. Her face was tired. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept much, but there was something brighter in her expression than there had been yesterday. Hope, maybe, or just the relief of not being alone anymore. "You came," Lily said. "I told you I would." Doris sat down on the grass beside her granddaughter, facing the 2 headstones. Howard and Christine, her husband and her daughter, the 2 people she'd loved most in the world, lying side by side in the cold ground. "I found help," Doris said. "A pastor at the community church. She has a nephew who works for the Department of Justice. He's agreed to look at the evidence." Lily's eyes went wide. "Really? He'll actually do something?" "He's driving down from Columbus today. We're meeting at the church this afternoon." Doris took Lily's hand. "But Lily, I need you to understand something. Once this starts, it can't be stopped. There will be investigations, interviews, maybe a trial. Richard Vance will know we're coming for him. And Aunt Rachel." "I don't care about Aunt Rachel." Lily's voice was fierce. "She never cared about me. She just wanted the money." "I know. But legally, she's still your guardian. Until we can prove she's unfit, until we can get you somewhere safe, I can take care of myself. I've been taking care of myself for years." Doris squeezed her hand. "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to. Not anymore." She paused. "There's something I need to ask you." Something important. What? When this is over, when Richard Vance is in prison and the truth is out, would you want to live with me? I know I'm a stranger to you. I know you've only known me for 2 days. But you're my granddaughter, Lily. You're Christine's daughter, and I've already lost 32 years with my family. I don't want to lose any more. Lily was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her mother's grave, then at her grandmother's face. My mom used to talk about you, she said softly. Before she found out the truth, when she still thought you were guilty, she'd say that even if you'd done something terrible, you were still her mother. That she still loved you, even if she was angry, even if she didn't understand. And after she found out the truth, she said she was going to bring you home. She said she was going to give us both a second chance. Lily's voice cracked. She never got to do it, but maybe we can do it ourselves. Doris pulled her granddaughter into a hug. They sat there together, two survivors of the same catastrophe, holding on to each other in front of the graves of everyone they'd lost. We'll do it together, Doris promised. For Christine, for Howard, for all of us. Marcus Williams, Pastor Gloria's nephew, arrived at the church at 2 o'clock that afternoon. He was in his 40s, tall and serious, with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen too much of the world's ugliness to be surprised by anything. But when Doris showed him Christine's files, the documents, the recordings, the photographs, even he looked shaken. "This is comprehensive," he said, flipping through the folders. "Your daughter was thorough. She could have been an investigator." "She was an accountant," Doris said. "Numbers were her thing. Patterns. Things that didn't add up." Well, she found a lot that didn't add up. Marcus set down the folder and looked at Doris. "Mrs. Marsh, I need to be honest with you. What you have here is enough to open an investigation, but it's not enough for a conviction. Not on its own. What else do we need? The original case files that Detective Holloway mentioned, the ones in the safe deposit box. If those still exist, if they show what he claims they show, that's your smoking gun." He paused. "Do you know where Holloway is now? The recording was made 3 years ago. I don't know if he's still alive. I'll find out." Marcus stood up. "I'm going to take copies of everything and bring it to my office. I'll need to brief my supervisor. Get authorization to open a formal investigation. This is going to involve multiple agencies, FBI, State Attorney General, possibly the U.S. Attorney's Office. How long will it take? Weeks, maybe months." These things move slowly. He must have seen the despair on Doris's face, because he added, "But Mrs. Marsh, they do move. Once this wheel starts turning, Richard Vance and everyone who helped him are going to have to answer for what they did. I promise you that." After Marcus left, Pastor Gloria sat with Doris in the church office. "It's really happening," Doris said. "After 32 years. It's really happening. Justice delayed isn't always justice denied," Pastor Gloria said. "Sometimes it just takes a while to find its way." The investigation moved faster than Marcus had predicted. Within a week, FBI agents had tracked down Frank Holloway, now 81 years old and living in a nursing home in Florida. His memory was failing, but the safe deposit box was real, and it contained everything he'd promised. Original forensic reports showing the timeline of Patricia Vance's murder didn't match Doris's confession. Witness statements that had been altered before trial. Internal memos from the district attorney's office discussing how to handle the case quickly and quietly. The evidence was damning, and it led to more evidence. Richard Vance's financial records showed payments to Officer Daniel Kerr going back decades, regular deposits into an offshore account, carefully hidden but not carefully enough. Phone records placed Kerr in the vicinity of the road where Christine died on the night of her accident. And when investigators examined Christine's car, still sitting in a police impound lot 3 years after her death, they found something that had been overlooked or deliberately ignored in the original investigation. Her brake lines had been cut. Christine Marsh hadn't lost control of her car. She'd been murdered, just like Doris had suspected. Just like Lily had known all along. The arrests came 6 weeks after Doris walked out of prison. Richard Vance was taken into custody at his office, in front of his employees and colleagues, the cameras of 3 news stations capturing every moment. Officer Daniel Kerr was arrested at his home, still in his uniform, still believing he was untouchable. 4 other officers were implicated in the cover-up and suspended pending investigation. The district attorney who'd prosecuted Doris in 1992, now a state appellate judge, resigned in disgrace when his role in suppressing evidence came to light. And Doris Marsh was officially exonerated. The ceremony was held at the Clearfield Courthouse, in the same building where she'd been convicted 32 years earlier. The governor was there, along with the state attorney general, representatives from the Innocence Project, and a crowd of reporters who descended on the small town like locusts. Doris stood at the podium, Lily beside her, and listened as official after official apologized for what had been done to her. They used words like miscarriage of justice and systemic failure and tragic error. They promised reforms, oversight, accountability. Doris didn't believe most of it. She'd seen too much of how the system worked, or didn't work, to trust that anything would really change. But when they handed her the certificate of actual innocence, when they officially declared that Doris Marsh was not guilty and never had been, she felt something shift inside her. A weight she'd been carrying for 32 years finally lifted. "Would you like to say a few words, Mrs. Marsh?" the governor asked. Doris looked out at the crowd, the cameras, the reporters with their microphones and their hungry eyes, waiting for a soundbite they could use on the evening news. Then she looked at Lily, standing beside her in a new dress that Pastor Gloria had bought for the occasion, her granddaughter, her family. "The only thing that mattered. I spent 32 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit," Doris said, her voice steady. "I missed my daughter's entire adult life. I missed her wedding, the birth of her child, her funeral. I missed my husband's final years, his illness, his death. I missed everything that should have been mine." She paused. "I'm not standing here to thank the system that failed me. I'm not standing here to praise the people who finally did their jobs 32 years too late. I'm standing here because my daughter, Christine Marsh, gave her life to prove my innocence. She found the truth when no one else was looking. She died because she wouldn't stop fighting for me." Doris's voice broke, but she kept going. "Christine never got to see this day. She never got to see her mother walk free. But her daughter is here. My granddaughter, Lily, is here. And everything I do from this moment forward, I do for them. For Christine, who saved me. And for Lily, who believed in me when she had no reason to." She looked directly into the cameras. "To everyone who's been wrongly convicted, who's sitting in a cell right now for something they didn't do, don't give up. The truth has a way of coming out, even when it takes longer than it should. And to everyone who helped cover up what happened to me, who looked the other way while an innocent woman rotted in prison, I hope you never sleep well again." She stepped back from the podium. The crowd was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. Doris didn't hear it. She was already walking toward Lily, pulling her granddaughter into her arms, holding on to the only future she had left. 3 months later, on a cool spring morning, Doris and Lily stood in front of a small house on the outskirts of Clearfield. It wasn't much. A modest 2-bedroom with a porch that needed painting and a yard that needed work, but it was theirs. Purchased with the settlement money from the state, the compensation for 32 years of wrongful imprisonment, it wasn't nearly enough. No amount of money could give Doris back what she'd lost, but it was enough for this: a home, a fresh start. Lily had been officially placed in Doris's custody 2 weeks earlier, after a court hearing that had lasted less than an hour. Rachel Marsh hadn't even contested it. She'd been too busy dealing with her own legal problems. The investigation had revealed that she'd been siphoning money from Lily's trust fund for years, using the child as a cash cow while barely keeping her fed and clothed. "It needs work," Lily said, studying the house with a critical eye. "Everything needs work," Doris replied. "That's what makes it interesting." They walked up the porch steps together. Doris pulled out a key, a new key, not tarnished and worn like the one that had unlocked Christine's secrets, and opened the front door. The house was empty, waiting to be filled, waiting to become a home. "I was thinking," Lily said, walking through the rooms, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. "We could put a garden in the backyard. Mom always wanted a garden. She used to talk about growing tomatoes and peppers and herbs." Doris smiled. "Your grandfather and I used to have a garden. At our old house, before everything happened, we grew tomatoes every summer. Will you teach me how?" "I'd like that." They ended up in the kitchen, standing by the window that looked out over the backyard. The yard was overgrown, full of weeds and wild grass, but Doris could see the potential, could imagine it transformed into something beautiful, something living, something that Christine would have loved. "Grandma?" Lily's voice was quiet. "Yes? Do you think Mom knows that we're okay, that we found each other?" Doris put her arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. She thought about Christine, working alone in that storage unit, building a case to save her mother. She thought about Howard, waiting year after year for a wife who never came home. She thought about all the people who'd been lost, all the time that had been stolen, all the things that could never be recovered. "I think she knows," Doris said. "I think she's been watching over us this whole time, making sure we found our way to each other." Lily leaned into her grandmother's embrace. They stood there together, looking out at the overgrown yard that would become their garden, the empty house that would become their home. "Grandma?" "Yes? I'm glad you didn't give up. All those years in prison, all that time, I'm glad you kept going." Doris felt tears on her cheeks. Not tears of grief this time, but something else. Something that felt almost like peace. "I didn't have a choice," she said. "Hope was all I had, and it turns out hope was enough." On the first anniversary of Doris's release, she and Lily returned to the cemetery. They brought flowers, white lilies for Christine, yellow roses for Howard, and they sat together in the grass between the two graves, just as they had on that first day when everything changed. "I still talk to her sometimes," Lily admitted. "When I'm alone, I tell her about school, about my friends, about you." "Is that weird?" "No," Doris said. "I talk to both of them every night before I go to sleep. I tell them about our day, about what we did, what we're planning. I think they like knowing we're okay." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what I want to do when I grow up." "Oh? What's that?" "I want to be a lawyer. One of those lawyers who helps people who've been wrongly convicted, like the Innocence Project." She looked at Doris. "I want to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else." Doris felt her heart swell. Her granddaughter, this brave and brilliant child, carrying on Christine's work, carrying on the fight for justice that had cost her mother everything. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Doris said. "Your mother would be so proud." "You think so?" "I know so." They sat together until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Then they stood up, brushed the grass from their clothes, and started the walk home. As they passed through the cemetery gates, Lily slipped her hand into Doris's. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up, for coming to find them, for finding me." Doris squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "Thank you for waiting," she said. "Thank you for believing. Thank you for being brave enough to hide behind that tree." They walked home together through the fading light, an old woman and a young girl, two survivors of the same storm. Behind them, the cemetery grew dark and quiet, but the graves weren't lonely anymore. They were watched over, visited, remembered, and somewhere, Doris liked to believe, Christine and Howard were watching too, seeing their family finally whole, seeing the justice they'd waited so long to receive, seeing the love that had survived everything, 32 years of prison, decades of lies, death and grief and loss, and come out stronger on the other side. That was Christine's gift. That was Howard's legacy. And that was what Doris would spend the rest of her life honoring, not just surviving, living,